Hello, I'm Chris Moon, a fellow artist manager, and I will be your guide through tough love, adventures in artist management. Today we speak with an old friend of mine, Mark Cunningham, from Red Light Management. I got to know Mark when he was just starting at Aware Records, and I had just started managing Josh Rouse. And we got to work closely together when I was running Noise Trade, as we were early supporters of Brandi Carlile at the beginning of her career. We chat about his time at Aware, how we got into artist management, and how we both lament and miss live music during this pandemic. I find Mark to be one of the most passionate and articulate managers I've had the pleasure to work with, and I hope you enjoy our chat together. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Mark.
3, 2, 1. My name is Mark Cunningham. I work for Red Light Management, and I work with Brandi Carlile, the Warren Treaty, Noah Gunderson, the Lone Bellow, Ruth B., and Blind Pilot.
Welcome, Mark. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat today.
Hi, Chris.
So, usually to kind of get us going here, and the kind of through line theme of this season has been origin stories. So, I'd like to, if you don't mind, kind of go back to the start. How did you bump into the music industry and ultimately end up in the artist management field?
Well, I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the home of Amway and Steelcase, and I always loved music and I always loved sports, and I knew that I wanted to work in one of those two fields. I just had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what those fields looked like. In high school, a couple friends and I promoted a concert for Fellowship of Christian Athletes, a fundraiser at our school, and we hired like the coolest band from Grand Rapids, um, called the Screaming Carrots. This was 1991, and we paid them $400. We spent $400 on a PA, and we raised $400. So we sold $1,200 worth of tickets, and it felt like such a victory. Me and a couple buddies, we were juniors in high school. We would go to like other high schools in town and hang up posters and sell tickets for $5 at lunch, and it was a lot of fun. It was a big success, and I don't know if that's when I got the itch to sort of be in music, but when I went to college at Michigan State, I had 4 internships in the music business, and one of them was I was a college rep for Aware Records, which was this really small independent record label out of Chicago. It was founded by a Michigan State grad, although I didn't know him.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that either. Huh.
Greg Latterman, yeah,
Okay.
and he was from East Lansing. But I, you know, I was a huge fan of the label. I was a huge fan of the music that the label was working with, and the label was founded on compilation CDs of like regional bands that were doing well, but because there was no internet, there was no way to find out about all these other bands. So, if you liked Vertical Horizon, you were probably going to like Jacko Pierce and From Good Homes and Hootie and the Blowfish. But if you lived in the Northeast, you wouldn't have known about those bands because they weren't sort of regional. So anyway, Greg had the great idea of like putting all these bands together on these CDs, sort of like mixtapes, and then these bands started getting signed by record labels, and then Aware started being this incubator of talent. And when I was in college, I was a rep for this company, and I would get to know the people that worked in the office. And there was only a few people that worked there, but I would call all the time and ask for more posters or buy CDs because you couldn't shop online. This was 1994, 1995. And when I was graduating, they asked if I wanted to go on tour one summer, and I was like,
Wow.
absolutely. So they hired me to go out on the Horde tour, Horde.
Oh
If you
yeah.
remember that, that was like the hippie version of Lollapalooza, founded by, I believe, Blues Traveler. So Aware had been running the CD store at the festival for the last few years, and it started with like Greg in his Jeep Wrangler with like a rented U-Haul by himself. A whole summer of just like hawking CDs for the bands, but it was a way to get these compilations out to the world too. So the summer I graduated, I went on the road for, I don't even know, like a month with the Horde tour in a big van with some friends. And then I started working in the office. And I remember one of the first days or weeks I was there, I mean, I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing, and I don't think they did either. Greg walked up to me, put this record on my desk from this band called Stir that was from St. Louis that I loved, and he goes, "Get this on the radio." And that was my training, and I was just like, I don't know what that means. So fortunately, because Aware had there was a lot of attention on the company because all the success that all these bands were having, and these bands weren't signed to the label, but they were sort of being discovered through the label.
Hmm.
So Aware did a joint venture deal with Columbia Records, and because of this attention that Aware had been getting, Greg had made a lot of friends in the business. So I flew out to LA and I sat with one of the big indie radio promoters, and he like taught me how radio works, and I sat there for 2 days while he like showed me the ropes, and
Wow.
it was an invaluable lesson of just like, okay, this guy who's like killing it in this business and knows how everything works is like telling me. I was like 22 or something, or 21. um, so I came back, tried to use all these skills that I had learned. Of course I was very unsuccessful, but fortunately soon thereafter, the deal with Columbia kicked in, and we signed the band Train, and we put out the first Train record through the independent arm of Sony's distribution, which was Red, RED.
Hmm.
And so we put that record out through Red, and then it sort of got upstreamed into Columbia, and then it became a big Columbia priority, and they had huge hit songs off that record, and that was my first platinum album.
Wow.
And so, growing up and thinking about what the music business means, you think it's a wall full of platinum plaques. And I actually had one, and I felt like I earned it, and it was pretty amazing. And then, I was started running the rep program. I was kind of doing marketing. I was doing radio a little. It was just a really small company that, our mission was then to like support our partners at Columbia and, sort of work together with them. And then um, there was this artist named Gus out of LA. And I think he was the reason Guster had to change their name to Guster because they were Gus.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, and I think this guy's name was Gus Black, but he went by Gus. Anyway, we were in love with his first record, and he was looking for a record deal. And a couple people in the office, we were all like, "Oh my God, we got to sign this guy. He's amazing. He's the greatest." But my boss, Greg, found that or had this EP from this kid named John Mayer. And it was an EP that everyone had passed on. Every major label passed on this guy.
Hmm.
And Greg brought it home one weekend. He got it from John's attorney, who was a friend of the company's. And he came back Monday morning. He was like, "We got to sign this guy. This guy's unbelievable." And we were all like, "What are you talking about?" Like, he's like, "Listen to this EP. Like, you got to listen to this." So I think it was an informal vote that we took, but we all got to say, who do we want to sign, Gus or John? And Greg believed so strongly in John, and I believed so strongly in Greg that I just voted for John. I was like, I trust Greg.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Greg, even though I love this Gus guy. And the rest was history. He sold like 20 million records
Yeah.
and all the Grammys, and he's a legend now. And it, we signed him, and he came to the office and played for everybody. He came up from Atlanta, and we were just like floored. And then I ended up tour managing Glenn Phillips, the lead singer of
Hmm.
Toad the Wet Sprocket. Um, we were working with Glenn. He had become a management client, and I'll get into that in a second. But Glenn was doing like his first solo tour. He was doing like small clubs on the East Coast, and we put John on as the opening act. And then I, who had never tour managed, became tour manager for some reason. So I was out for like 2 weeks with them, and I loved Toad and I loved Glenn, and Glenn was amazing. But the momentum that John was creating every time he would get on stage was like just so captivating and so undeniable that he would play and people's jaws would be on the floor.
Right.
And because they had never seen something like this, his guitar playing was at a level that most people could never get to, and his songwriting was incredible, and it was fresh, and he was young, and he was good
Hmm.
looking, and like
And really
his
charismatic.
personality and his
Yeah.
stories. Yeah, like just the it factor, like
Right.
you couldn't take your eyes off him, and the songs and everything. So seeing that every night was like mind-blowing for me. And then, we would do a 200 cap room and he would sell 100 CDs. Like
Yeah.
half the place, like truly would buy his record. And so we knew we were onto something with John, and he, he went and made the first record, and we released that again independently through that distribution arm, Red.
Hmm.
And then, like 6 months later, Columbia picked it up and re-released the record with a new cover. And so that original version with a cover that you can't find anymore was, it was like a really special moment for all of us that were involved, because it's like we had this little secret and we had this little record that was just like, a monster. And once the world found out about it, it was, game over for that. It was just like, he became a superstar so quickly.
Yeah.
And he was really one of the, I think the people who would be able to say that they benefited from Napster, because John's ascension began when Napster was really starting to take off and people were file sharing. And so John's music was being shared in this new platform that no one, they never had access to files like this before. So he really benefited from just sort of the word of mouth that was happening as people were just discovering Napster and people were sharing files, and no one knew what to do about it or what to make of it. It was just like, "Oh, I guess this is happening." So
That was my history with him too. You'll appreciate this story probably. I was visiting a friend of mine at Columbia in New York, and sitting outside his office was John Mayer on the computer, because he was also one of the first people to like blog like on a regular basis in the
yeah,
music industry, certainly at least. And I was like,
yeah,
and I already knew that, but I was like, holy shit, here's this kid like just sitting here at the computer working it all day, like a desk job, I mean, he definitely knew
yeah.
how to connect with his fans at
He
that
was
level.
interacting with
Yeah.
people. Yeah, yeah. It was incredible, and his instincts are incredible. He is so smart. And he, as you've seen over the last 20 years, his ability to have this TV show on Instagram that just like he knows
Mhm.
what people want and he is able to give it to them in a way that is pretty remarkable. Um, and he's reinvented himself several times. And now this whole Dead and Company thing, it's like he is cementing himself as like the guitar player of this generation.
To me, he reminds me a lot of Eric Clapton, like, and I don't know if that's kinda how he wanted to model himself, but he's at that level as a guitarist with the work he
Yeah,
does with Dead and Company, but then obviously he's also musician and artist in and of itself, and it's like that's a hard line to toe in a modern era. You just don't see people
yeah.
on that level operating on both, cylinders like that.
Yeah, he actually modeled himself after Stevie Ray
Oh,
Vaughan,
okay.
and I think Stevie Ray Vaughan was like his hero on guitar, and that's what Stevie Ray was like the reason he was able to lock himself in his bedroom and play guitar for 12 hours a day and just become a master. Anyway, not to make this the John Mayer podcast, but that was a big part of the first few years of my career, like being involved with Train and then being involved with John Mayer. And then we signed Five for Fighting.
Mhm.
And then we signed Matt Carney. And we had this run at Hot AC Radio and AAA that
Oh,
was like
yeah.
unbelievable, like just unbelievable. And, having the partner at Columbia was great because the radio team was incredible and the company was like crushing it with these bands that we were signing. So while all of that was happening, we were noticing that there were other bands out there that we wanted to work with that had labels, and the management game wasn't nearly as competitive or big as it is now. So back then, there was tons of bands that just didn't have
Mhm.
managers. I just think, for the most part, the label business was so big and successful, and that's where people went to work because there was tons of jobs. They paid well, and I think management, again, like 20 some years ago, it just was looked at differently. So we just went, hey, we should start managing some of these bands because they have label deals, but they don't have managers. And that's how we started working with Glenn. Um, there was a band that I loved on Epic named Verbo out of
Oh, yeah.
Chicago that I started working with. And Jason, the frontman, is still a good friend of mine to this day. And he, I loved that band. Unfortunately, they didn't make it where they should have. But we started managing bands, and Liz Fair became a client, not of mine, but of the company's. And then Greg, through one of his contacts, started working with the Fray. and that was before they had ever played outside of Colorado. No one knew who they were.
Mm,
Um, and so then they were a management client, and that really sort of established us as a management company as well as a label. And as we saw the label business starting to suffer from digital and from downloads and Napster and all these things, we thought like, okay, we need to A, diversify and start managing
hmm.
bands, and B, maybe start getting out of the label business, like start phasing out the label
Right.
side and start focusing on management. So we brought in a few extra employees, and we started like focusing on signing clients and managing bands. And for the first couple of years, just like when I had that Stir CD dropped on my desk, and I was told to get it on the radio, like I had no idea what I was doing. When we started managing bands, we had no idea what we were doing either. I mean, there was a band that I won't name that, they were on tour, and I was just not very organized because I didn't really know what I was doing. And they missed a show because I didn't fax them their itinerary. So they just missed the
Wow.
show in San Antonio, and it was entirely my fault.
Oh man.
And I felt horrible, but I realized I had to start getting my shit together. I needed to get organized. I needed to have a plan to actually manage a band and manage a business. So it was a it was a low stakes mistake to learn a big lesson. And that allowed me to sort of start really taking this seriously. Um, and then in 2006, we started working with Brandy Carlisle, and she came to us through our attorney, who had been our company's attorney for 10 years. And uh,
Oh,
um,
okay.
she had recently hired him at the suggestion of her longtime booking agent. And Greg and I went and met with her and the twins, Tim and Phil. Somehow, some way, they hired us. And I've been working with Brandy and the twins since early 2006. So that was a good one because she was on Columbia. We had such good relationships with all those people there. And I think that
Right.
helped. But when we started, she had just sold out the Showbox in Seattle, which is about 1,000 tickets. And she did. I was living in Chicago during this whole time, 96 to 2013. I was in Chicago. So after college, I moved to Chicago to start working at Aware. And she did like 450 or 500 people at the Metro, right around the time she started with us. So, um, now last summer she did about 8,000 people in Chicago at Northerly Island, and she did 16,000 people at the Gorge here in Seattle. So, you know, sold out Madison Square Garden last year and all those things. So the
Yeah.
the growth was steady since the beginning, and to see where she started from when we jumped in, and she had been working for 10 years before that, playing to five people at any place in Seattle that would let her bring a PA. So, um 2006 was really the sort of the turning point, I think, for me, where I was like full-time management and really focused on becoming a good manager, as the company was sort of again phasing away from the label game a little bit and just not making it such a priority.
Right. Yeah, the things that kind of stand out to me as you kind of ran through all that is just the ability to kind of have a bit of guidance through all this. It seems like Greg really took you under his wing, early on, once you settled in Chicago. Obviously, getting that kind of deep dive lesson in radio promotion when you went out to LA and shadowed somebody for a few days. I'm sure, I would assume those opportunities kind of showed you, in some respects, oh, if I can like spend some time around some people that are doing something like this, I can glean a lot from that kind of mentorship kind of aspect, and then see how this unfolds. I mean, it feels like Aware was in a place where it allowed you guys to just do what is probably the hardest thing to do as a manager, which is surround yourself with really good music and then find your way through that.
It wasn't really a mentorship, though. It was such chaos for all of us because we were
Okay.
such a small company, and Greg was new to the business too, and he was figuring it out, and he was operating at a really high level, dealing with, some top people at some of these big companies. And so it for me and the other few people that worked there, it really was like, figure it out. And it's a great way to learn because you're sort of thrown into this and you have to learn how to build a rep program and run it, and you have to learn how to deal with these people and keep them motivated, and then you have to figure out radio and how to like call stations and try to get airplay and get them to listen to your records, and then press, and like all of these areas we were just sort of all on our own.
Hmm.
So it was kind of like you have to be a jack of all trades, and it's sort of the bootstrap mentality that I've been able to carry through my whole career, where it's, there's no job too big or too small, you just got to get the job done. And so um
Right.
this like hustle attitude that I had to learn to survive has really carried me a long way. And there was a lot of people that would come and go and work at the company, and especially young people who think they want to work in the music business. And so they get out of college and then they get a job in the music business, and then they realize it's really difficult, and it's not just like hanging out with bands and, listen to music all day. So many people and friends of mine still that came and went pretty quickly, just when they realized it really wasn't for them. I feel really fortunate that I've been able to do this for, I'm on year 24 now, and knock on wood, hopefully I have many more in front of me.
Yeah, well, it definitely compounds, I think, not only the experience, but also the success, you know.
That helps.
I think if you yeah, no, it definitely helps. And, going back to the one artist you mentioned that you really loved that didn't quite get the fair shake. I mean, God, there's so many stories that I'm sure, all of
Yeah.
us could share of that. But there's also, I think there's something to be said for just sticking it out. Persistence, um, goes a long way. I mean, up until I remember, even I guess it's been almost a couple of years now. But when Brandy played at the Grammys, it's like that was a moment where a lot of people, first, I wouldn't necessarily just say discovered her, but became more aware of her in that sense. Because there was definitely some other touch points earlier in her career that a lot of people might have bumped up against her. But that was like a moment, obviously. And that record was a moment for you guys and for her. But that's not overnight success. That's years of hard work.
It's 20 years of overnight success for her. I mean, she's 39 now. She was 38 on that Grammy performance. She had been doing this for 23, 24, I mean, since she was a teen.
Yeah.
And so, yes, while it feels overnight to the masses, the people that have been with her have
Hmm.
been with her for a very long time and seen this, like, every time she comes back to a new market, playing the next size up and the next size up and selling them out. And it's been remarkable to watch, as there's never been a huge spike, but when there's not a huge spike, there's also not a huge drop. And so we've been able to,
Right.
continually move in the right direction, which is really, really difficult. And it's just a testament to how incredible she is, and the songs and her voice and her charisma and her instincts and her knowledge and her fans. And it's been incredible to be a part of this.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch, from the sidelines because the other thing I think is really unique is when you have an artist that has that long trajectory and gets that moment. Not only are they a little bit more situated and prepared for it, but there's like no loss of energy. Like the amount of work that you guys were doing up until earlier this year, obviously, and then also just creatively, the various projects that she was working on the heels of this, success, I think, shows the determination. And there's this few artists that pick up on that and run with it. So it's always endearing to see somebody like have a moment like that and then make the
Yeah,
most of that moment too and just keep going instead of kind of relaxing for a second, and putting the brakes on because to some degree you
there's
can.
been zero relaxing. I can tell you that.
So how did you was it Brandy that brought you out to Seattle then ultimately?
So my actually no. So I left. So uh continued to manage Brandy and a couple other clients. until 2013, and then she and I left Aware together, and we went and joined Red Light. We talked to a couple companies and went to Red Light, and there was only one other Red Light employee in Chicago. He's on the radio team, and he didn't live anywhere near me, and there's no office. So I was kind of on an island, and I was like joined a new company, and I had left the one I had been with for 17 years, and it was an interesting transition. You don't really realize how much of your identity is wrapped up in something until it's taken away. And I really was like kind
Mm.
of feeling that for the first time. Like it was my only job since college, and one that I had enjoyed so much and had so much success with. And it was, I just had such an incredible run there. And so there was definitely a transition of like, oh, okay, this is different. I'm like an anonymous person at a huge company, and I'm working by myself, trying to like make my way. Um, and so, kind of coincidentally, a year later, my sister had her first baby, and she lives in Seattle, and she's my only sibling. And my wife and I were in San Francisco for the holidays with her family, and we flew up to Seattle to see the baby, who was a couple weeks old. And we were flying in, and I remember I was looking out the window, and you just seeing lakes and trees everywhere. It was incredible. And I just turned to her and I said, "Let's move to Seattle." And she said, "Okay." So it was really that simple. We just went, "Okay, we're going to move here." And she's from the West Coast, so she's always wanted to sort of live by mountains in the West Coast and closer to family. And we were sort of on a
Hmm.
family island in Chicago. So with my job changing, our kids being really young still, we thought this is the perfect time to sort of make a move like this. So we very quickly decided we were going to do that and moved about 6 months later. And at the same time, Jason Colton, who worked for Red Light and has worked for Red Light for at that point for like 10 years or something, he was in the Charlottesville office, the headquarters, and he was moving out to Seattle too with his family. And so, kind of
Hmm.
just coincidentally, we moved here at the same week in July. And we didn't really know each other. We had
Wow.
met a few times, but we didn't know each other. And we decided we were going to open an office. So I think in November that year, found a space. We moved into the Recording Academy's space, sort of in Lower Queen Anne. And we moved in, and we hired sort of an office assistant, office manager, and then we brought in another manager who was in town, Rachel Flotard, who works with Nico Case. She came to Red Light and started working out of our office, and then we've added a few people since then. So we have a little team. There's 6 people. We have a nice office, and hopefully one day we will be back in it. But so it was really helpful for me to sort of feel a little more integrated with the company, to be working closely with Jason, who had been at the company forever. Um, he's got some big and great clients, so he's really experienced too. So it was a nice shift for me personally to sort of start fresh in Seattle and be closer to family, and professionally it was a great move too. And Brandy lives out here. So that was another component of it that was helpful, but that wasn't really what the decision was based on. It was just kind of a gut, like,
Gotcha.
let's just do this.
Well, obviously, it was meant to be the fact that Jason was making that move at the same time. I mean, what are the
Yeah.
odds of that?
Yeah. It worked great. We work together on Blind Pilot now, but just being around him and seeing he operates in such a different way than I do. So it's interesting to see someone
Hmm.
that sort of handles the same job so differently in many ways. We can learn a lot from people like that.
Yeah. So, what ways in particular?
We sort of focus on different things. I, rarely get involved with the graphics or the aesthetic of the band or things like that, and that's something he's really passionate about. So the things I sort of I look at different things, and he looks at things like that. And so when we work together on a band like Blind Pilot, we both sort of bring our separate skills to the table, along with all the things that we share. So um, it's just again, it's like that's something I never would think to focus on, or it's a creative component. I tend not to get too involved creatively with my bands. Like, they're the artists; it's their decision. But I've learned that
Hmm.
you can add a lot of value by sort of participating in these conversations more. And I've seen it with him. And he works with Fish, and Fish is extremely creative, and they do these wild things on New Year's Eve, and that's something that he's involved with. And so just again, like sort of seeing his level of involvement and care and how precious it is, it's been really helpful.
No, you bring up a good point too. I'm always curious because a lot of folks either kind of lean, like you said, one way or the other, like kind of dabble a little bit in the creative side of things, but or otherwise kind of lean the other direction, which is more on the business side. But the role of a manager, is hard to define that way. There's quite often every artist is a little different, and quite often you get pulled into that, and you have a need for speaking to the creative side, but then I know myself, I was fortunate to work with a lot of artists that were, to your point, very much driven artistically to the degree there wasn't much room, or I never felt like I had much room to really speak on any of the
Yeah.
creative element of it. Um, but everybody's different to a large degree. Um, I was going to ask you, that kind of leads me to this question too. Like, how do you find and ultimately decide when to start that kind of relationship with an artist? Because I mean, obviously the pull initially for the most part is probably going to be the music, the creative side of it, but then you have to have the vision on the business side of it too, to some degree. Is like, oh, where can I what's my role in this, and how can
Yeah.
I grow this or play a part in it? So what are some of the touch points that you found that draw you in?
Generally, it's the music first. And I've made this mistake over the years of letting my love and passion for the music blind me to the other warning signs, like,
Mm,
and vice versa. I've been found myself in situations where the the business has been so enticing that I've overlooked the music, and it's hard to do it either way. You really have to love the
mhm,
music, or else you're just like selling widgets, and you can pay the bills that way, and there's a lot to be said for that. It's important. Um, but it's hard to get
mhm,
motivated when you just aren't super, super passionate about the music. Um, and then the flip side is when you are so passionate about the music, it blinds you to the reality of what's outside of it, which is maybe not a lot of people are interested in the music, or the person is not the best person, or they're hard to work with, or whatever. And you sort of think that your ego kicks in, and you think you can make the difference. You alone are the reason that this artist hasn't been more successful. And it's usually not the case, like the success and failure of a band for the most part is on the music and the artist. It's not on the team. It's not on the manager, for both good and bad. So I think it's easy to sort of get lost in either side of that, and the only way that I've been able to strike a balance is through trial and error in many years of doing it. And there's been some clients I've looked at and looked very seriously at, and I've ultimately just said I shouldn't do this for one reason or another. And um, I'm glad I'm learning, because it's when you make the commitment to manage an artist, I mean, it's a multi-year commitment, and it's a lot of time, it's a lot of energy, it's a lot of stress, and in a lot of cases, it's for no money. And so you have to be willing to do it
right.
basically for free, because in a lot of cases, that's what it's going to be. So, as I've gotten older, I've become a little more discerning of some of this stuff. But you know, it's easy to fall in love with a song, and that's like a powerful, powerful force.
It is, yeah, and it's also, no matter how good any of us get at identifying the talent component and reading the individual or the group and what the potential is there for them, uh, there's so many other elements to go into it. It's just, yeah, it's a hard thing to bet on unless you can find that more complete picture of, oh yeah, not only, yeah, like you said, I guess, you summed it up quite well. Like, am I willing to do this for free
Yeah,
for a while? Essentially, like, can I put my passion into it and roll the dice and hope that we all get to a better place, where this becomes more of a business and more
yeah,
viable.
and it's tough. It's tough It's a hard like I was saying earlier, it's such a hard business. It's hard to be in it, it's hard to stay in it, it's hard to be an artist in it, it's hard to make a living from it, and, now that we're going through this pandemic, you can see how vulnerable artists are to a shutdown of any kind where you disrupt their revenue
Mhm.
stream because so many artists, the revenue streams are what keeps them alive. And it's a meager amount of money. It's not, you know, millions and millions and millions of dollars. I mean, obviously for some it is, but these sort of mid-level bands, when they can't tour, it's really tough.
Mhm.
It's really hard. And it's hard to see because music has played such a big role in my life. I think it's one of the great things humans have ever created. And, I think it deserves to I mean, it plays such a huge role in so many people's lives. It sort of deserves to be a viable business, but it's really hard for it to be a viable business for bands and business people alike.
Right. Yeah, and then, you bring up a good point too. It's like this is a really interesting time because it kind of cuts both ways. I mean, there's a lot, like you said, like mid-level artists. That touring is probably their most immediate cash flow generating opportunity for a livelihood component. But then on the flip side of that too, I mean, I think you and I were were texting around my birthday back in April just about, missing going to see festivals and stuff. It's like I have never had this long of a drought in my adult life of not seeing live music in person. And it's like just from a personal level, um, not having that engagement is, you know, I don't know, it's very bizarre.
Yeah.
I guess it's the only way really to describe it. And I think it hurts on both sides to a large degree. Plus, I think with music being so omnipresent and available in your pocket now to listen to, there's something really unique about seeing somebody perform too. It's like that is a stronger connection point that maybe rivals or comes pretty close to what you hear or feel when you first hear a song that just resonates, or an artist that resonates with you. And it's like you can recreate that a little bit through listening to a record, but it's not the same as seeing somebody perform. um yeah, I definitely miss that
Yeah.
element as much as the artist, I'm sure, miss it.
Sports and music, like I said, are my two favorite things. And the thought of being in an arena during a sporting event, cheering in the same moment for something, just it's like it gives me this intoxicating feeling that I wish I could have, and it's the same when you're in a crowd at a concert where you're just, you and whether it's 20 people or 20,000 people are united in this adoration for whatever's about to happen on stage is so important. It's so important to me. And
Hmm.
it's something I've really longed for over the last couple months, and it really just sucks that it's taken away from us. The thing one of the conclusions I've come to in my life over this time is I wish I had a time machine, and if I had a time machine, I probably would go back to the early '70s and just follow Pink Floyd around every show they do, because there's something about that band that speaks to like my soul in a way that few artists do. And during the last couple months, I've listened to a lot of Pink Floyd, and my desire to see these songs live has been so strong. But I would want to see it live in
Mm.
that setting of like 1971, and when they're playing Echoes and it's 23 minutes, and it's like, God, I wish I had a time machine, because I would go there. I wouldn't go buy like Apple stock in 1998, or it's like, I mean, I probably eventually would get to buy an Apple stock in 1998, but the thought of touring with Pink Floyd is like the thing I want the most. And it's something that I haven't ever thought about until this pandemic, and listening to music a lot and listening to Pink Floyd a lot, and realizing like that moment speaks to my soul, and I would do anything to be able to make that happen.
No, I'm so glad you shared that because yeah, a flood of similar ideas kind of float to my mind. Like I think of somebody like Otis Redding, like what would it have been like to see somebody like that
Yeah.
perform, in person? Like if you could strip away, it's almost like watching a black and white movie. Like if you stop for a moment and go, how do I visualize what this looked like in color for a second? It's a very similar kind of thing. Like what would it be like to stand in front of a crowd and hear somebody that projects the way he did and his level of energy? Like it's almost palpable on film, but it's like, what would it have been like to see in person, that level of, performance is kind of unrivaled in a different way than Pink Floyd, but it's still very coming from a similar place of just an experience you can't
Yeah,
replicate. I will say I was fortunate enough to see David Bowie play twice, and I have seen a lot of really great performers, but he definitely had a certain air to him that just comes with years of experience. It's like he just was totally
yeah,
comfortable at entertaining. It's almost like you'd imagine what it would have been like to see like Frank Sinatra in the 50s or 60s, his height of his career. It's like this level of comfortability and connection is just very few people have that, and very few people have the
yeah,
opportunity to perform that long to develop that. I mean, we're just now
yeah,
seeing artists that from our generation, from those early to mid 90s, a lot of them either didn't survive or don't really operate at that level, um, at the same, same space nowadays to even get that far, to kind of emulate that
yeah,
kind of, a lot of it, you mentioned, John spending time on guitar, like Stevie Ray spent time on guitar. A lot of it's just spending time on stage in front of people. Uh, it's like
yeah.
I worry that we don't the streaming era and the pause on live performance is maybe not stifling creativity as much, but it's stifling performance and that level of performance for a generation potentially if this thing drags out. You know.
Yeah, but there's this whole new generation of people performing on TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
They're just performing in a different way. So I think maybe the cumulative effect of this is more people are going to be creating, more people are going to be sharing their sort of creative energy with the world. And maybe it's not as many musicians, but maybe it is. We really don't know. The thing about the Pink Floyd Time Machine, really what ultimately is what it draws me to this concept is like being in the
Mm-hmm.
crowd with 20,000 people sharing this moment. And that is what I was trying to equate to like what's missing in our lives is we can't see
Right.
shows. It's one thing to see the songs, but really I want to like be in the moment with the other 20,000 people who are sharing the same experience. And that goes back to like missing sporting events and screaming at a moment on the field or on the court that everyone is united in this excitement. And it's so important. And what we will be there again. It's just when and what's it going to look like and all that stuff. When you're talking about Otis Redding, it makes me think about the other things that I sort of long for. It's those same moments right before or in early February. The Lone Bellow band I
Mm-hmm.
work with did 2 nights at the Troubadour, and the Troubadour in the front lobby, which I had never seen
Mm.
before, had has this sort of I don't know what you call it. It's these like several poster boards that are laminated, and it's the Guns N' Roses history at the Troubadour. And there are photos of when it was LA Guns and when it was whatever the other band was that Axl was in before they became Guns N' Roses, and it had photos of those shows. And then it had photos of like first time Guns played. And then, the next panel was like their third show, the first time they played My Michelle live. And then more photos from another show, the first time they ever played Sweet Child of Mine. And it takes you through, they
Wow.
did like 40 shows there or something, and it takes you through the history of like this is like 1986, of Guns, that what led up to Guns N' Roses, and then all of their shows. And it was like, I don't even know, their 15th show that sold out. I mean, they played a handful of shows that didn't sell out. So then you're like in a crowd watching Axl and Slash and Duff and those guys finding their way to this band. People were at these shows and they got to see this band. And so seeing this thing laid out at the Troubadour is really incredible because the origin stories of these bands are so
Mm-hmm.
important. And people don't know it. They just think, oh, they made Appetite and then they put out a double album and then they became D-bags, and then everyone hated them. And
Right.
it's like when you simplify the arc of a band, it's like, oh, this is the point when people turned down this band because they kept showing up late, and they canceled the show I was supposed to go to. I was supposed to see them at the Pontiac Silverdome with Metallica, and I never got to see Guns in their
Really?
heyday.
Oh no.
And I think we had tickets to a show at the Palace in Detroit too, and that show didn't happen. I finally saw him at Coachella a couple years ago on the comeback, and the thing I learned, or I realized, was, oh my God, Slash is this
Yeah.
band. That was my takeaway from that show. It was like, I mean, I knew he was incredible, and I knew his solos and his guitar work on these records, but seeing it live was just like, holy shit,
Wow, that's
Slash.
so interesting because I saw the Red Hot Chili Peppers at Coachella. I think it was 2003, and that was when John Frusciante was still playing with them. And all four of them are incredibly talented in their own right, and they work really well together as a unit. I give them full props. But John Frusciante just totally outshined everybody at that performance. As a guitarist, as an instrumentalist, and even as a vocalist, he sounded better than Anthony Kiedis. And just it
Wow.
was fascinating. I mean, I just completely honed in on him. I'll tell you my Guns N' Roses story. I went to Farm Aid in 1990. Um, in Indianapolis, and because Axel's from Indiana, he wanted to play Farm Aid. So that was their last performance with Steve Adler on drums. They fired him the week later,
Wow.
and I'll send you the clip on YouTube because it was on the Nashville Network broadcasted the whole show, and so it's on tape and it's on YouTube. But Steve runs out and trips and falls, and his shin goes right into the drum riser, and you just look at it and go, God, that must have hurt. And he was just so apparently he was just so off his rocker. It was just the band couldn't.
He didn't feel
Yeah,
a
he didn't
thing.
feel a thing, and the band did not. They were. I guess they were at that point. They were so ambitious. They were over that aspect of their careers. But they played Civil War for the first time, which was just phenomenal. And
Yeah.
then they played a UK sub song called something to do with farm. I can't remember. Down Here on the Farm, and it was great. So I only got to see him play two songs,
Yeah.
but I can at least say I got to see the original lineup. Play two pretty
Yeah.
stellar songs in the midst of that. That Farm A was poignant too because Elton John was in town because Ryan White was passing away of AIDS, and as a way to kind of channel some of that grief, they asked him to come down and play, and he came and played a few songs that day, and he was so
Nice.
emotional, you know, in that performance because of everything that was going on. But it was just, oh, and I saw Garth Brooks that day for the first time too. Before Garth Brooks was a huge thing, it was crazy.
Wow. That was a
It was
big
a big
farm
Farm
aid.
Aid. Lou Reed played, which was great. Iggy Pop. It was really great. Farm Aid actually.
Wow.
But yeah, that's my gun story for sure. Gosh, I hope we got it. Yeah, hopefully we have some more opportunity. One of the last shows I went to was Brandy's show here at Fillmore when it opened in Minneapolis,
Oh, nice.
which was on Valentine's Day, which was fantastic. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think the actual last show I saw was about a month later, Nathaniel Rateliff at State Theater. But yeah, what was the last show you saw?
The Lone Bellow played at the Neptune in Seattle the day before Seattle or Washington State went on lockdown,
Really?
and we really debated it whether it should happen. In hindsight, it seems insane,
Mm-hmm.
but at the time, everyone was so like we weren't really sure what was going on, so they decided to do it. I think like there was like 200 no shows or something, so a decent amount of because remember Washington State was the
Right.
first place with COVID, um, so we did that, and then I think they played it. Yeah, they played in Portland the next night, and then the last couple shows in California we had to cancel, and they hightailed it home. But yeah, same thing. It's like it'll come back somehow, some way. This isn't the end of our
No, no,
lives,
no. Yeah.
But it's the uncertainty is so unfortunate for so many reasons, and the thought of not being at a concert again is just crippling. But
Yeah. Yeah,
one day.
definitely. Indeed. Well, thanks for taking the time to chat.
No problem, man. Appreciate you letting me ramble on.
Thanks to our guest Mark, and thanks to you for allowing us to occupy your airspace today. I'd like to thank my friend Tony Miracle for the theme music and graphics for Tough Love. And if you get the opportunity to, we'd love for you to rate us, follow us, and above all, share this podcast with all your friends and fellow music industry and artist communities. It takes a village. You can reach us at Chris@Anadonia Management. That's CHRIS at ANHEDONIAMGMT.com. Be well, trip up, get back up, and let's learn as we go. Until next time.